Okay, so now we're going to go into um, the essentially the creation of the United States of America. Okay, and um, this is going to be a very interesting um, discussion we're going to go through. I am going to emphasize some things that are normally not emphasized in this section. Um, but before I go further, I kind of want to point out here's an artistic depiction, kind of celebrating the revolution by a German, I believe you could say a German American, that's very famous for early American pictures. And here, again, I just want to point out that we'll see even before George Washington becomes our first president, George Washington, his legacy looms large. And again, I want to point out, because he helped do this one simple thing, which is help win the war. For many, I mean, obviously it took a lot of different people and different factors, but ultimately Washington is kind of the symbol of the victory, so that you really don't have a United States, for better or for worse, without him. And the American public seemed to be pretty much universally aware of that. And as you looked in some of the clips, at least one that I showed in the last section, that he was able to keep the morale up of his men, and he was able to adapt in a way and make this legacy thoroughly implemented. Now, yet also his role in the post-war period, before he becomes president and even after, there are certain things that were controversial even then, that reflects his, not just his views on the role of the state when dealing with internal problems in the United States, but some of the debates that take place now. Okay, and so first of all, I'm going to just go very briefly into discussing the Articles of Confederation, and I'm going to go into one of these important events that is completely marginalized in most textbooks. And it's going to be with Shays Rebellion. But okay, so what we have to remember is that before the Constitution and before we had President George Washington, we had an arrangement that was, really, there wasn't a United States per se. There were states in name only, really united. And we have to remember that much of what the whole fight was for independence. And states essentially, remember, if we went back, that even some of the observations of British was that there could never be United States because people are more loyal to their own individual states than to any concept of this idea of being United States. And essentially you had this very extremely decentralized arrangement. And what ends up happening is that after the war, like all wars, you don't have just a simple arrangement where the whole entire world is fine now. In fact, what you see is a country in shambles. And for many of the people who fought in the war, they returned to their farms, if they had farms. And there was still the issue of payment. I mean, it's just like, imagine if we had a civil war right now and you were making house payments. You probably don't consider that a priority during the war, and maybe even your, the banks or the people you would owe the money to would maybe not be able to even find a way to implement getting that money from you, but then you return. Life, we're going back to normalcy. Business wants to go on with business as usual. And you have these veterans coming back that are not able to make their payments. Now, I think many of you are going to be shocked. This documentary I'm going to have you watch, I think, is really an important history that, again, that has been marginalized. It has to deal with Shays Rebellion. It is military veteran farmers who are getting arrested, put in open air prisons, because at the time there was the way that you handled things. Imagine if you can't pay your bills, you go to jail. And to think that there was veterans fighting for the War of Independence, and these rich merchants. So, and this is where Zen's got it right. I'm gonna say, just to be clear, in Shays Rebellion, you're gonna see that the elites, some of the elites, literally had the nerve to say, okay, I know you just fought this revolution that secured our interests as well, but if you can't make this payment, you know, you're going to go to in prison. That's in fact what actually was happening. And, you know, these vets were outraged, and they mobilized under the leadership of Daniel Shays. And you, in a sense, had what you could argue really a small U.S. Civil War again. And it's going to be one of the events that's going to lead to the creation of the Constitution, which is also why it's very important. Now, the Shays Rebellion is mentioned as a footnote, essentially, in any textbook you get, whether it's a history book or a political science textbook, as one of the things that led to revealing the weakness of the Articles of Confederation, and one of the reasons why there was the impetus to creating the U.S. Constitution. But it doesn't, they don't go into much detail of it. I found this documentary a while back that really helped, excuse me, my computer power is almost going out. Oops, hold up. Okay, sorry, with technology, I actually didn't realize that my computer wasn't plugged in and it almost turned off. All right, sorry. Where was I? So essentially, I guess what I was going to say is that this not being covered really is shameful. And I found this, right. So what I was saying is that I found this documentary that did a great breakdown and analysis, I thought, of what happened. And it's quite intense. I think it's a very interesting and significant history. And it opens up a lot of controversial questions, dealing with the fact of what our rights are. And you'll see in my post, I'm having set up, on my discussion post, is what do you think these things mean in light of the Second Amendment? And I'm also going to talk about another less known situation that's directly linked to this with George Washington, as well as the Whiskey Rebellion. Many argue that the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms, which we'll discuss a little bit more later, gives Americans the right to protect ourselves from the tyranny of our own government. In other words, that our leaders gave us the right to bear arms as a defense, not against just criminals or foreign invasions, but to even be mobilized and defend ourselves if we were to have an abuse of power by our leaders at some given point. I want you to think about that argument in light of the history you're going to learn in regards to Shays Rebellion and then the Whiskey Rebellion and another part of the Constitution, which I'm having you read. And so I'm going to end here. I'm going to have you watch this documentary, and then we'll continue from there. And of course, this will be brought into our discussions for the assignment this week.